I've been a fan of the square format for as long as I've enjoyed photography. The first artist I properly fell in love with was Vivian Maier, who is famous for her TLR self-portraits. In fact, it's what inspired me to get my first TLR and really fall in love with photography. I really think the waist level viewfinder on TLRs just really makes an image perfect. And there's something I'm just always drawn to about the square format. It was with this TLR I took a series of self-portraits that are very reminiscent of Vivian Maier's work, and I eventually upgraded to my next TLR, which I will talk about later. I've had this kind of idea of a video essay about why I love the square format so much for a while, going back nearly a year and a half now, so I thought I'd finally make it. So here it is, my ode to the square format. The square is balanced, even on each side, and symmetrical. While a portrait is domineering and connotes power and a landscape is vast and wide, letting us step into the image, the square is neutral. We're encouraged to look around the image in a circle, analysing more finer details that we might have missed originally. And being trapped in this confined dimensions of a square, it looks really nice. Personally, I love the square format. The perfect balance with no weight on either side of the image makes them really interesting for unique compositions. According to Timothy P. Brown, the square format was introduced or popularized in 1929 with the introduction of rolliflex cameras. These cameras would create an iconic aesthetic that changed how we see photography and have become a staple in history for cameras. It wouldn't be until the late 1940s after World War II where we see Hasselblad develop their first 6x6 medium format camera, that being the Hasselblad 1600F, which was described as a truly groundbreaking feat of engineering. Hasselblad really found their footing during World War II while developing military surveillance cameras, and from there they would go on to develop commercial cameras, becoming probably one of the most famous camera companies in the world. And you know, they took these cameras to the moon. They shot square format on the moon. These images are honestly crazy and have always stood out to me, not only just being in the square format, but they're really unique. Not only is it a really pivotal piece of human history captured on celluloid, but there's something so amateurish about how these images are composed that I really like. For all intended purpose, these images were meant to be documentative, but there is so much character in them from the Apollo astronauts. It feels like it so easily could have been taken as a holiday picture of a family on vacation, and also the composition is amazing in this. The lunar vehicle parked in the background with a sheer crater descending into shadow obscures the left composition, while the right is contrasted by our astronaut, also casting a shadow at the direction towards the camera. Finally scattered in the foreground and the midst of the image are footprints littering the scene, showing the full presence of the astronauts there. And I truly don't believe any other aspect ratio could have conveyed this better than the square. It fits so much detail and character into a uniform box, and it really stands out as unique to me. I also can't talk about the significance of the square format without talking about Vivian Maier, because she is so important to me. Whenever asked who is my favourite artist, she comes in top 5, maybe even top 3, up there with the legends Bernard and Hilla Becker themselves. Vivian Maier was a caregiver slash nanny who produced her body of work in New York during the 60s until the 90s. But with all of her work, she never really showed it to anyone and kept it mainly as a secret, taking images purely for herself and creating an archive of over 100,000 negatives. And it wouldn't be until 2007 where storage lockers containing archives of her work were auctioned off that the world would be exposed to her emulsion. There is something about this work that just screams out to me, and I cannot describe it. This work was created by somebody during their whole working life, documenting how they viewed the world predominantly in the square format through her waist level viewfinder. Using a TLR with the waist level viewfinder, it gave her street photography such a grounded perspective and was really unique. Maier's work viewed the streets she lived in and her own presence in them, viewing herself as a spectator, interjecting herself into the images through various different methods of self-portraiture, whether that be through mirrors, reflections, or even just her shadow. She was constantly finding new and interesting ways to interject herself into the environment she was documenting. Maier never had any serious photography training either, starting with a basic box brownie similar to this one here, and it wouldn't be until the 1950s where she picked up her first TLR along with some various other 35mm cameras. For somebody with no professional photography training, especially at that time in history, she was a master at her exposures. Her self-portraits were so well composed and exposed for, they look surreal, almost like double exposures, but it's not, it's all in-camera work. I was really drawn to Vivian Maier's work when I first started shooting film. At a time where I had so little understanding of film, exposing, and all the basics, seeing somebody who became such a master at it with so little training as well, it was tantalizing. It's so interesting looking back at my old sketchbooks and seeing how much I actually talked about her in my old work, and how often I would just crop all of my 35mm images into square format. I was so desperate to shoot the 6x6 format that I eventually picked up my first medium format camera, that being the Kodak Cresta 2 for £5. It's a shitty plastic bodied camera that resulted in very displeasing images and definitely was not a good choice. I eventually purchased the Helena A1, making it my first TLR, and while this thing was very limiting and difficult to use, I created some really good images on it, specifically these self-portraits. All of these images are very clearly inspired by Vivian Maier's work, especially this one. It's almost a direct copy. I did eventually end up upgrading my TLR to the Yashica 24, which is now my current camera and I still use. And I've really taken a lot of good images on this thing. However, I have been shooting film for about 3 years now, and Vivian Maier's work doesn't play as big as an influence as it used to, which is a bit upsetting. Revisiting her work now specifically for this video, I felt really inspired and I really want to go out and re-explore my love for her passion. I also realise I'm calling this video why square format is the best format, while honestly nowadays I prefer the 6x7 format. Due to again shooting film for about 3 years now, my style is always changing. But at the end of the day, I think square is still objectively the best. I've created so much good work in the square format, and there's so much you can talk about with how neutral and how much power you can interject into those images that it remains a better format, even though right now I still prefer a little bit of weight to each side of the border with 6x7. There is so much you can do with the square format, whether you want it to be symmetrical, whether you want to defy symmetry, whether you want to take portraits in the square format, whether you want to take landscapes in the square format. You can defy conventional rules of photography so easily with the format, and I just don't feel like I can put into words how good the square format is. With the popularization of DSLRs and their standard format being 35mm or even cropped sensor cameras being smaller than that, modern day cameras have kind of lost that charm they used to have with all these different unique formats. Sure, you can always digitally crop an image, hell I crop all of my 35mm images into 6x7, but it's not the same as being confined to that border while composing, working with the aspect ratio and challenging its limitations to create a good image. Hasselblad and other companies still produce medium format digital cameras, but they come at a very hefty price. And this is where we start talking about social media and instant photography. I'm going to be talking about Instagram mainly because that's the main social media I grew up with, but this does kind of apply to other social medias, but especially Instagram. Instagram was originally made as a photo sharing platform, the name coming from Instant Photo and Telegram. Even the original logo of the app took direct inspiration from instant cameras, ditching that vintage look in 2016 for its more modern, colourful logo. And Instagram only originally let people post in the square format, mirroring Polaroids, which I thought was a great idea. Obviously, unfortunately, with social media companies becoming more prevalent, trying to copy each other and stay relevant, Instagram just kind of became a generic social media application with TikTok features and Snapchat features where they all have stories and short form content. And it's a real shame to see an app born out of a love for Polaroids and instant photography be turned into just another boring social media app. And it's interesting to see what having apps like this on our phone has done to photography. Nowadays, more than ever, we consume media in a portrait format, and that's because our phones are portraits. And when we're constantly holding our phone in a portrait orientation, we take photos in a portrait orientation because that's what looks best on Instagram when you post it on your story. Even when we take a selfie, we're taking an image of ourselves in portrait formation. That image looks horrible, oh my god. We've lost the concept of a landscape working best as a landscape and a portrait working best as a portrait. Or does that just sound like contemporary photography? I don't know. Nowadays when we're taking an image, it's because we want it to look best when we share it to other people. And that's the big thing with giving everyone a camera. Photos are becoming a bit more mundane. I also realise I haven't properly talked about Polaroids yet, which is a bit of an oversight on my behalf. Polaroid cameras were revolutionary when they were announced. With the release of the SX70 to mass audiences, it gave people instant images, while in the past you had to wait nearly a week or if not a month for your images to come back. And there's so much charm and nostalgia that people see in Polaroids. When you're out with friends and you take a Polaroid together, you had an instant image and an instant memory captured on film. It's pretty much a one-to-one reproduction of time captured in a beautiful square format. And Polaroids are even popular than ever right now with a nostalgic craze for instant photography. However, this is where the modernization of the medium strikes again. Specifically, Fujifilm's Instax seems to be the more popular form of Polaroid nowadays, and while Instax does still have a square format, promptly being titled Instax Square, its main format is Instax Mini, which, you guessed it, is in portrait. Perfect for posting on Instagram or storing in the back of your phone case, because everyone loves a small portrait of each other. And that kind of brings us back to social media and photography as a technology. We as a culture will progress and change and develop our technologies, and photography being a technology, it will develop and evolve with us. And I think one running theme you will always see in the history of photography is a timeline of people trying to commercialize it. When photography was originally being developed, you had to know chemistry. It was a chemical reaction. We went from these big fancy wet plate cameras to Kodak releasing the Box Brownie, which is technically the first point-and-shoot camera to be sold commercially. The tagline for these cameras are literally, you press the button, we do the rest. From there you see the idea of a point-and-shoot camera develop more, with easy-to-use point-and-shoot cameras to disposable cameras to the more compact modern point-and-shoot cameras we see in the 80s and 90s. It was always done with a purpose to make photography more commercially and consumer-friendly, so everyone could take an image. But now in a digital world where everyone has a camera in their pocket at all times, what's the point of taking an image? I mean, it's probably already been taken before, like there's no point doing it anymore. Well, maybe that's the point. Maybe that's why we should take more images. But next time you're on your phone in the camera app, click that little button in the top corner and bring down the aspect ratio and set it to a square format. See how that cropped view of framing kind of changes your idea of composition and what looks well in frame, and how intrigues you to develop the image a bit more. And then once you've taken the image, post it on Instagram in the square format like God intended. Long-time viewers of this channel would know I like taking self-portraits. Call me a narcissist, but I think the study of your own viewpoint reflected back at yourself is a really interesting thing to document, specifically on film. It's within our human nature to like images of other people, and when you don't have people to take images of, you might as well just take pictures of yourself. Going back to Vivian Maier's self-portraits, it's interesting to see how she documents herself in her world. It isn't just a picture of herself, it's a portrait of her environment, confined in a tight square, letting her eyes wander around the image and explore her life. I think when I took this series of self-portraits using very expired film, I wanted to explore the film's relationship with decay. These images are purposely obscured and really abstract, and that's something I want to document in the process of making these images, using expired film to emphasize that. Emotions affect how we take images. Brave statement, I know. When I first took these series of self-portraits, it was my first proper attempt at a process like this, and I vaguely remember being really sad at the time when I took these. I think I took the bus all the way to town instead of getting off at my college like I usually did, and then on the walk back to the college, which was about 15 to 20 minutes, I just kind of sat with my thoughts alone with my camera and just kind of documented myself on that journey. And I think that's why these images mean so much to me. There's character behind them and actual personal meaning to me. And ever since then, every self-portrait I've taken has just felt like a cheap attempt of trying to mock this, which kind of sucks. I mentioned earlier that square format isn't my favourite format anymore, but I still respect it a lot, especially the square format and waist level viewfinder combo. That shit is lethal. Using a waist level viewfinder to create and compose an image changes how I view photography. It actually feels like I'm creating the image in real time before I even press the shutter, and that view from the waist level viewfinder creates a much more natural and real feel to the world. Combining that with the square format, making a really neutral image. The camera becomes more than just a tool to capture the image, and it feels like it's involved in the creation of the image itself. Honestly, if you've never tried a waist level viewfinder, you've got to try it. It changed photography so much for me, and it's so worth it. It's the entire reason I got the Nikon F2 for my 35mm camera, because that has a waist level viewfinder. This video definitely got rambly. It's very much my first attempt of this kind of video style, and I don't know if I did good or not. This idea of a square format video has been on my mind for a year and a half, and now that I'm finally making it, I still don't feel like I've done a good enough job of explaining why I like the square format. I guess don't view this video as an objective opinion, the square format is the best, but more subjective. To me, the square format is the best because it connotes so much power and emotion in just such a basic image, but to you, it could just look silly. I think one of the big things to why the square format is so good to me is because it is so neutral in how you interject your own emotion onto it. When you see a portrait, you're being told this is a portrait, and when you see a landscape, you're being told this is a landscape. But the square is anything. It is anything you want the image to be. It's just contemporary photography. Am I sounding pretentious as fuck right now? Anyway, huge shout out to Vivian Maier. Gotta be one of the top photographers of all time. Absolutely love her work to death. The story behind her, the art, is also beautiful and amazing. I love her so much. If you've liked this video essay, I've got a few other concepts that I think might work well in this kind of style, so like and subscribe, maybe see some more sometime. And if you didn't like it, then please be nice. My Instagram is linked below where you can see some more of my lovely photography and keep up to date with the kind of stuff I'm working on. And I do respond to messages if you ever want to reach out and talk about the square format and Vivian Maier, I don't know. Thank you for watching as always, and Matt out. I'm gonna have to walk to the camera. Or... I'd also like to clarify, I've been stood here talking for an hour about cameras in the square format. A whole hour. My throat is so dry. Oh yeah.